What happens when the most powerful woman in television looks someone in the eye and wordlessly shuts the door on them, without ever raising her voice, without breaking a smile, and without even breaking stride? People don't forget moments like that. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. They replay them. They whisper about them. They swear they saw something no camera caught. And on the night of the 2025 International Emmy Awards, that's exactly what started the fire. Not a scandal, not an official statement, not even a dramatic confrontation. Just a moment. A moment that didn't make the broadcast. A moment that most of the room pretended not to notice. A moment that somehow became the only thing anyone was talking about as soon as the lights went down and the red carpet rolled up. So here's the question no one wants to answer out loud. How did Meghan Markle, someone who once commanded global attention simply by showing up, end up in a position where she allegedly approached Disney's Dana Walden and was told, in the bluntest way possible, to get lost? And why did it happen now? Because timing is everything. And this timing wasn't random. The room was already electric long before the cameras started rolling. You could feel it in the air. The kind of silent hum that only shows up when extremely important people are all pretending not to look at one another. It wasn't just another awards night. This was the evening Dana Walden, Disney Entertainment co-chairman, industry titan, the woman who makes or breaks careers with a single phone call, was receiving the International Emmy Founders Award. Translation: she wasn't just attending. She was being honored. She was the event. Every executive, every producer, every rising star was there for one reason: to be seen supporting the woman who has quietly shaped the entertainment landscape for decades. So when someone steps into that kind of spotlight uninvited or unprepared, there's no such thing as a small misstep. It lands differently. It echoes. It follows you out the door. But here's where things get interesting. This wasn't the first event Meghan had appeared at since her shift from royal life into Hollywood visibility, but it may have been the first one where the room didn't react the way she expected. Because normally, one press glance turns into 10. One photo turns into a media storm. One arrival becomes a headline. But this time, something was off. People saw her, but they didn't swarm. They didn't circle. They didn't angle themselves for the perfect shared frame. It was as if the room made a decision before the night even started. And that silent decision set the stage for everything that came next. Let me ask you this. What's worse, being publicly rejected or being quietly ignored? Most people would say the first. But anyone who understands Hollywood knows it's the second. Because in this world, silence isn't absence. It's punishment. Imagine walking into a room where every face is familiar, every conversation is strategic, and every camera is waiting for the next headline. But somehow, the energy shifts the moment you step forward. Not dramatically, not loudly, just subtly. Enough that your team notices. Enough that your timing feels off. Enough that you start recalculating your moves in real time. Now imagine pairing that tension with the knowledge that the one person you need to connect with, a woman who controls access to the most powerful storytelling platform on earth, is being honored that same night. And then imagine believing you can still turn things around with a single photo. Not a deal, not a meeting, not a comeback announcement, just a picture. Because in Hollywood, a picture is never just a picture, right? A photo is currency. A photo is narrative. A photo is proof. Proof of relevance. Proof of access. Proof of belonging. But here's the twist. When a room full of cameras is ready to capture anything, and somehow captures nothing, that's when the real story begins. So why did this matter? Why this moment? Why this night? Why Dana? Because the International Emmys aren't about celebrity, they're about credibility. They're not a red carpet popularity contest. They're where the global industry shows up to crown the people who actually run things. And Dana Walden isn't just another executive attending an event. She is the event. She is the gate. She is the access point. So when the rumor spread that Meghan approached her for a photo op, and the response was allegedly sharp enough to freeze the room, people didn't just talk about what happened. They talked about what it meant. Was it personal? Was it professional? Was it a message? Or was it simply terrible timing? And more importantly, was this moment the beginning of something bigger? Because when a door closes in Hollywood, it doesn't close quietly. It creaks. It shakes. It signals. Sometimes it even slams so loudly that people 3 cities overhear it. But not this time. This time, the rejection didn't explode. It slipped under the surface like a shark fin, barely visible, impossible to ignore. That's when the whispers began. Not the dramatic kind, not the scandalous kind, the dangerous kind, the kind that start with, "Did you see that?" The kind that spread with, "Was that intentional?" And the kind that end with, "Oh, this is going to be bad." Because the truth is, nothing destroys a public figure faster than one single question. What if the room doesn't want them anymore? Not the public, not social media, the room. The room where decisions are made. The room where access is granted. The room where silence is deadlier than headlines. So here's where we're headed. How did a single moment create a ripple effect that didn't end when the cameras shut off? And why did people start asking whether this wasn't just a rejection, but a response to something that had been building for years? Because this story didn't begin on the red carpet. It began long before anyone noticed. And what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. Everything changed the moment the cameras shifted their attention, not toward Meghan, but toward Dana Walden stepping onto the carpet for the first time that night. Because if you were watching closely, you would have noticed something subtle. Something most people would miss unless they understood how Hollywood really works. Energy follows power, not fame, not controversy, power. When Dana appeared, the room didn't just look. It recalibrated. The publicists adjusted their positioning. The photographers reset their angles. Executives who had been mid-conversation suddenly paused, not obviously, but just enough to signal they knew the hierarchy. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't noisy. It was silent respect. And that's the kind of silence you can't fake. So imagine standing there, waiting for your moment, rehearsing your timing, calculating the exact second to move toward the cameras, only to realize the spotlight has shifted permanently and not in your direction. For most people, that would be uncomfortable. For someone trying to rebuild an image, it's catastrophic. Because in Hollywood, perception isn't just part of the game. It is the game. And once the room senses a shift in status, you don't get to correct it with confidence or charm. The room decides. And the room had already decided long before the alleged interaction even happened. But here's the question nobody wants to ask. What makes a single photo so important that someone would risk humiliation just to get it? Is it about image, control, relevance? Or is it about something deeper? Something no headline ever says out loud? The fear of disappearing. Because in the entertainment world, fading out is far scarier than being criticized. Criticism keeps you in the narrative. Silence erases you from it. And that fear, the fear of being erased, is what makes this moment hit differently. Let's rewind for a second. Meghan Markle didn't step into Hollywood as a newcomer. She re-entered it with global recognition, a Netflix deal, and more attention than most actors see in a lifetime. In theory, that should have been enough. But Hollywood doesn't operate on theory. It operates on leverage. Attention only matters when the right people validate it. And the people who validate it aren't influencers, tabloids, or trending hashtags. They're the ones who decide what gets greenlit. And at the top of that pyramid sits people like Dana Walden. Not loud, not flashy, not headline-hungry, but decisive. So when the rumor spread that Meghan approached her hoping for a single shared frame, just a moment captured, just enough to restart momentum, the reaction wasn't shock. It was confusion. Because normally, that's not how things work. Normally, powerful people don't need to ask for proximity. Proximity comes to them. Which leads to the next uncomfortable question. What changed? Was the industry cooling? Were alliances fading? Or was the timing simply terrible? No one had the answer. But everyone had the same reaction. Something is different now. And then came the alleged moment. The one that didn't make it onto any official camera feed, but somehow ended up being the most replayed scene in people's retellings of the night. Witnesses didn't agree on the wording. Some said it was sharp. Some said it was cold. Some said it was just firm professionalism. But every version had one thing in common. It was a no, not a polite delay, not a soft deflection, not a carefully scripted, maybe later. A no that stopped the interaction before it started. And that's what turned a forgettable exchange into the center of the night. Because in Hollywood, rejection isn't rare, but rejection delivered in public, on a night meant to honor the person delivering it, carries weight. And whether you think the moment was exaggerated or misunderstood, one thing was undeniable. The room felt it. You could see it in the way conversations slowed, You could feel it in the shift of eye contact. You could sense it in the stillness that followed. It wasn't dramatic. It was worse. It was controlled. Now, here's where most stories would end. With the rejected walking away. With the powerful moving on. With the room pretending it never happened. But that's not what happened here. Because the reaction didn't stay inside the building. It leaked. Quietly at first, like a rumor that didn't realize it was about to become a headline. One person told another. No one knew the full story. Everyone knew enough to make it sound bigger. And suddenly, without a single photo ever being taken, the moment became more powerful than any image could have been. Which brings us to the real question. Why did this moment travel so fast? Was it because people love drama? Maybe. But more likely, it's because Hollywood isn't actually afraid of scandals. It's afraid of symbols. And this moment became a symbol of something larger. Something people had been sensing, but no one had said out loud. A shift. Not overnight. Not explosive. A slow, building shift in how the industry sees Meghan. Whether fair or not. Whether accurate or exaggerated. Perception changed. And once perception changes, reality follows. Not immediately. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like a door closing with no lock. But no invitation to reopen it either. So here's the crossroads. On one side, a woman being honored for decades of influence, stability, and industry respect. On the other, someone trying to re-enter a world that has evolved without her. Those two paths were never supposed to collide. But they did. At the worst possible moment. And the ripple effect didn't end that night. It was only the beginning. Because what happened next didn't involve cameras, red carpets, or whispered retellings. It involved decisions. Decisions that would reshape what came after. And raise a new question no one saw coming. Was this rejection just a moment? Or was it a signal? Because the truth is, the story doesn't really start until after the moment everyone saw. And what came next would change everything. In a way no one in that room could have predicted that IT started before Meghan even took a single step onto the carpet. You know those moments when a room feels like it already knows what's about to happen before it happens? When the energy shifts, not because of what people see, but because of what they sense. That's what the 2025 International Emmy Awards felt like. Not chaotic. Not glamorous in the usual predictable way. Tense. The kind of tension that builds when everyone is pretending they're relaxed, but their eyes tell a completely different story. Because even though this event celebrates global television, this year wasn't about television at all. It was about one person, Dana Walden. And everyone knew it. Executives arrived earlier than usual. Publicists stayed unusually close to their clients. Producers looked alert, not eager, not thirsty, just aware. This wasn't a night to make mistakes. This was a night to be seen supporting the right person. Because in Hollywood, loyalty isn't emotional. It's strategic. So when Meghan Markle stepped into that environment, whether planned, unplanned, or somewhere in between, she wasn't walking into a neutral space. She was walking into a room already claimed. And rooms like that do not share attention gracefully. Let's slow down and look at the scene. The carpet wasn't chaotic yet, just busy enough to feel alive, but controlled enough that every placement felt intentional. Photographers weren't shouting. They were waiting. Waiting for the face that would define the night. Normally, that might be an actor, a director, or an international nominee. But this time, everyone knew the moment Dana Walden arrived, the energy would reset. Which is why what happened before she even appeared matters. Because Meghan didn't enter into excitement. She entered into anticipation. Two very different things. Excitement welcomes you. Anticipation leaves you guessing where you fit. And that subtle difference is where the collision began, long before the interaction that would dominate the whispers. Most people think drama starts with a confrontation. But real tension starts with expectation. Here's the thing about red carpets. People assume they're chaotic, but they're actually choreographed. Nothing is random. Who walks when? Who stands where? Who gets the backdrop alone versus who shares it? Which photographers get the prime angles? Which names publicists whisper to the press line first? Every move is strategy disguised as spontaneity. So imagine how carefully calibrated this night was. Dana was receiving the International Emmy Founders Award. Disney executives were present in full force. International broadcasters were watching closely. This wasn't a social event. It was a message to the industry. Dana Walden is untouchable. So when someone tries to insert themselves into that narrative, intentionally or not, the room reacts. Not verbally, not confrontationally, but instinctively. And people felt that reaction before anything happened. They didn't turn. They didn't stare. They just paused, like a silent warning signal only insiders can read. But let's address the obvious question. Why would Meghan choose this moment? Why this event? Why this carpet? Why this timing? Because if you're trying to reposition yourself in Hollywood, you don't chase the spotlight. You align with someone who already owns it. A single shared frame with Dana Walden wouldn't just be a photo. It would be a message. A message to studios. A message to the media. A message to anyone questioning relevance. It would say, I still belong here. And in normal circumstances, that strategy would make sense. Except for one problem. This wasn't normal circumstances. Because on this night, the spotlight was not available to share. It belonged to one person, and one person only. And if you try to take space in a room that isn't offering it, Hollywood doesn't push back loudly. It pushes back quietly, which is always more brutal. Let me ask you something. Have you ever walked into a space expecting one reaction and gotten the complete opposite? Maybe you thought people would be excited to see you. Maybe you expected warmth or curiosity. Maybe you assumed your presence still carried weight. And then suddenly, you realize the room has moved on without you. Not because they dislike you. Not because you did anything wrong. But because something has shifted and no one told you. That's the kind of realization that doesn't hit instantly. It creeps in. First, you notice people aren't making eye contact as quickly. Then, conversations don't naturally open to include you. Then, even the cameras seem more interested in someone else. It's subtle, it's quiet, but it's devastating. Because fame disappears gradually, right up until it feels like it vanished all at once. And whether Meghan sensed it immediately or not, the audience did. You could see it in the body language of the room. Not hostility, not rejection, just absence of invitation. Which, in Hollywood, is worse than rejection. Rejection at least gives you something to fight. Silence gives you nothing. Meanwhile, photographers were doing what photographers always do. Scanning. Not for celebrities. For value. Because a picture isn't about who's in it. It's about who will pay attention to it. Now here's where things get interesting. Normally, Meghan's arrival would trigger movement. A shift in camera angles, a ripple of repositioning. But this time, barely anything changed. A few flashes. A few clicks. Nothing like the storm she used to generate effortlessly. It wasn't disrespect. It was recalibration. A quiet industry recalibration. Of where she fits now. And that single change, the absence of chaos, created more tension than any dramatic confrontation ever could. Because when the noise goes away, the silence becomes deafening. But the moment that sealed the shift wasn't visual. It was emotional. There was a split second. So quick most people would have missed it when Meghan paused. Not long. Not dramatically. Just a pause. As if she was waiting for something that didn't happen. A signal. A pull from the press. A cue that the moment was hers. And it didn't come. Her team adjusted. Her posture reset. The smile held. She continued. But the room had already changed. Because sometimes, the most powerful part of a story is the second before everything goes wrong. And that second had already passed. People assumed the collision happened when Meghan allegedly approached Dana. But that wasn't the collision. The real collision was invisible. It happened when expectation met reality. And reality didn't bend. Because for the first time in a long time, Meghan wasn't the center of the moment. The moment existed without her. And that was the beginning of the unraveling. The end of chapter 1 hasn't arrived yet. But here's where we're heading next. Dana Walden hadn't even entered the building. And when she did, what happened would make the silence look gentle. What happened next didn't look dramatic to the untrained eye. There was no raised voice. No frantic publicist rushing in. No visible crisis. Just a shift. A subtle tightening in the room's energy. Like everyone sensed that the person the night revolved around was finally about to arrive. Because before Dana Walden steps onto a carpet, the event is just preparation. But the second she appears, everything counts. And you could feel that countdown starting. Photographers suddenly checked their equipment. Assistants fixed jackets and smoothed dresses. Executives adjusted their expressions into that neutral but prepared look only powerful people know how to hold. It was the calm before a spotlight, not chaos, but precision. And in that carefully controlled atmosphere, there was one person who needed the moment to go perfectly. Meghan. Because if she was going to try for a proximity moment, a shared visual, or even just a brief acknowledgement, this was the window. Once Dana reached the main press zone, the opportunity would disappear. Not because anyone would push Meghan away, but because once an honoree begins their structured arrival, access becomes impossible. Timing is everything, especially when you're no longer guaranteed a second chance. Let's talk about the psychology of the red carpet for a moment. There are 3 types of arrivals. First-wave arrivals, people who come early to maximize press time. Mid-wave arrivals, people who want visibility without demanding it. Final arrivals, people who don't need the cameras. The cameras need them. Dana Walden falls into the third category. Her arrival doesn't chase attention. It reorganizes it. So when word traveled down the carpet that she was moments away, you could see the transformation happen in real time. Meghan may not have been the only one who noticed, but she was the only one who needed the moment to shift in her favor. Because once Dana took the spotlight, there would be no room for a second narrative. The night would belong to her, completely. And then it happened. The energy snapped into focus. Not gradually, not gently, instantly. Dana Walden appeared at the entrance, flanked by event organizers, Disney communications staff, and a press coordinator leading the way. Not dramatic, not loud, just controlled power. She didn't need to smile bigger. She didn't need to pose longer. Her presence was enough. People who had been mid-interview paused, not to stare, but to acknowledge the hierarchy. Someone at the far end of the carpet lowered their voice. Someone else subtly stepped back to give space. These were micro-movements, the kind that only insiders notice, but everyone feels. And if you were watching Meghan in that moment, you would have seen something shift. Not her expression, not her posture, her timing. Because this was the point in the night when she had 2 choices. Step back and wait, or step forward and risk everything. And she didn't step back. Now here's where the collision truly began. Meghan's team repositioned slightly, not aggressively, not obviously, just enough to align her path with Dana's incoming trajectory. This is a classic strategy on carpets. You don't chase, you place. You let the moment land naturally. If the other party acknowledges you, the photo looks organic. If not, you retreat with dignity. But this wasn't a normal alignment attempt, because the room already knew whose night it was. And when a space chooses its focal point, any additional presence looks like intrusion, even if it isn't one. So as Meghan adjusted her stance, waiting for the precise second to move, something unexpected happened. Dana didn't slow down. She didn't glance. She didn't pause. She didn't acknowledge the recalibration happening in her peripheral vision. She simply continued forward, in a straight, uninterrupted path, toward the primary press zone, not rejecting, not engaging, just bypassing. And somehow, that was louder than any confrontation could have been. Here's the thing most people don't understand. Being ignored by someone powerful in private hurts. But being ignored by someone powerful in public, in front of cameras, executives, and people who read social hierarchy for a living, is devastating. Not because of ego, because of optics. Optics become narrative. Narrative becomes reality. Reality becomes reputation. And in an industry built on perception, reputation is everything. So when Dana passed by without breaking stride, the photographers did something telling. They didn't follow Meghan. They followed Dana. Cameras pivoted. Angles shifted. Flash patterns changed. Not aggressively. Instinctively. Because photographers don't chase controversy. They chase what matters. And at that moment, the room chose who mattered. It wasn't personal. It was structural. Now, did anything dramatic happen? No. And that's exactly why this moment became the only thing people wanted to talk about. If Dana had stopped and declined a photo, there would be nothing to dissect. If she had smiled and posed, the story wouldn't exist at all. But doing nothing, saying nothing, changing nothing, created a vacuum. And vacuums get filled, not by facts, by interpretation. Some people whispered that Dana didn't see Meghan. Others insisted she did. Some claimed Meghan attempted to approach. Others said she simply positioned herself nearby. But all versions ended the same way. There was no interaction, no acknowledgement, no shared moment. And that absence became the collision. Because the moment you expect recognition and don't get it, the silence becomes the story. Here's where the emotional impact hit hardest. After Dana passed, Meghan didn't react outwardly. She didn't show disappointment. She didn't exit abruptly. She didn't break her composure. She stayed, smiled, held posture, maintained presence. That takes restraint most people don't have. But the room isn't just watching your face. It's watching your position. And something subtle happened. A slight shift backward. A brief internal recalculation. A softening of the moment. Not enough for the public to notice, but enough for insiders to recognize. The window had closed. Not permanently. Not officially. Just for that night. And once that window closes, there is no reopening it. If the story ended there, it would have been forgettable. A missed moment. An awkward overlap. Nothing more. But it didn't end there. Because the room reacted differently than anyone expected. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Collectively. Conversations started up again. But softer than before. As if people weren't sure whether to pretend nothing happened. Or wait for the next moment. Publicists exchanged glances. The quiet kind that communicate entire paragraphs without a sound. And then the whispers began. Not about what was said. About what wasn't. Because silence can mean 1,000 things. And in Hollywood, people choose the meaning that benefits their narrative. Which leads us to the moment the entire night pivoted on. The moment no one saw, but everyone felt. What happened after Meghan didn't leave. Because staying didn't end the collision. It triggered the next phase of it. And what happened next would turn a quiet bypass into the story of the night. Before we go any further, we need to answer the question nobody ever bothers to ask out loud. Why did this moment matter so much? Because it wasn't just about Meghan. It was about who she allegedly approached. Most people outside Hollywood hear the name Dana Walden and assume she's just another executive. Someone behind the scenes. Someone who signs contracts and sits in boardrooms. But that's not who Dana is. Dana Walden isn't a background figure. She is the room. So when a situation involves her, even indirectly, the impact becomes exponential. But here's what most people don't realize. Dana didn't become one of the most powerful figures in global entertainment by chance. She became it by surviving something almost no one in Hollywood ever survives. Change. Real change. The kind that destroys entire careers and builds new empires overnight. Let's break this down. Dana Walden's rise wasn't flashy. She didn't show up one day and take over the industry. She climbed it. Slowly. Strategically. Quietly. The way real power chooses to grow. She started where most people burn out. Network television. Back when the entire industry was shifting under everyone's feet. Streaming was taking over. Traditional ratings were collapsing. Studios were panicking behind the scenes. Names that once controlled the landscape vanished almost overnight. But Dana didn't vanish. She adapted. She transitioned from running a single network to overseeing entire divisions, to eventually stepping into one of the highest positions in global entertainment. Not because she was the loudest, because she was the last one standing. Let me ask you something. In a world that worships visibility, what does it say when the most powerful person is the one who doesn't need it? Exactly. Power isn't about being seen. It's about deciding who gets seen. And that's Dana's territory. Now, here's where things get interesting. A lot of people think Hollywood power is about personality, charisma, charm, the ability to dominate a room. Dana doesn't operate like that. Her power is quiet, not cold, focused. She's known for 3 things insiders whisper with a mix of fear and respect. She remembers everything. She never reacts emotionally. And she only says yes when it matters. In an industry built on impulsive decisions and public meltdowns, Dana is the opposite. She plays the long game, which is exactly why any interaction involving her, real or rumored, lands differently. It's not because she's dramatic. It's because she's definitive. If she supports someone, their career stabilizes. If she distances herself, the industry takes note, without anyone having to say a word. People don't follow Dana because she demands it. They follow her because she doesn't need to. So let's connect the dots. On the night she received the International Emmy Founders Award, Dana wasn't just attending a ceremony. She was being recognized for shaping the entertainment landscape on a global level. Think about that. Not for one show, Not for one project. For influence. Influence that stretches across decades, platforms, countries, and careers. That's why the room behaved the way it did. People weren't reacting to a celebrity moment. They were reacting to hierarchy. And hierarchy in Hollywood is not symbolic. It's survival. So when Meghan appeared that night, her presence wasn't controversial. It was complicated. Because you can share a space with a celebrity, but you cannot share a moment with someone whose power is being honored, unless you were already part of that orbit. That's the unspoken rule. No one says it out loud. Everyone obeys it anyway. But here's the part most viewers don't see. Hollywood doesn't run on talent. It doesn't run on fame. It runs on access. And access is controlled by a very small number of people. People like Dana Walden. If she supports a project, it becomes real. If she backs a creative team, doors open. If she signals confidence in someone, others follow. Not because they're afraid, because she's rarely wrong. So imagine the impact of being denied, not dramatically, not publicly, just silently, by someone whose decisions shift entire markets. It wouldn't matter whether the moment was intentional or misunderstood. The symbolism alone would be devastating. Because in Hollywood, perception always arrives before the facts. And once perception settles, it's nearly impossible to reverse. Which is why this moment, even if simple, hit like an earthquake. Not because of what was said, but because of who didn't need to say anything at all. Let's look at something almost nobody outside the industry knows. Dana has a reputation for being extremely selective about public association. Not because she's calculating, because she understands the weight of it. A photo with her doesn't just say, "We were in the same place." It says, "This person has my confidence." And that signal is powerful enough to revive careers, shift narratives, or rewrite industry assumptions overnight. So if that moment doesn't happen, people don't ask, "Why didn't she take the picture?" They ask, "What does it mean that she didn't?" And that question spreads faster than any rumor. Because meaning is more dangerous than gossip. Meaning changes behavior. And the people in that room, agents, executives, strategists, read meaning for a living. Which is why the silence became louder than any statement. Now here's the twist no one expected. This wasn't the first time Meghan and Dana existed in overlapping circles. Years earlier, there was industry speculation, never confirmed, about potential alignment. Nothing dramatic, nothing negative, just possibility. Possibility that never materialized. And in Hollywood, doors don't slam loudly. They just stop opening. Not permanently, not angrily, just quietly. So when Meghan showed up at an event honoring Dana, people weren't shocked. They were curious. Curious whether the past would be rewritten or finally confirmed. And when no connection happened, the industry didn't see coincidence. It saw clarity. Because sometimes a moment doesn't create meaning. It reveals it. But here's the real question. If Dana Walden is so controlled, so composed, so politically flawless, why would she allegedly shut someone down so bluntly? Why now? Why at an event honoring her? Why in front of witnesses? Unless the moment wasn't about emotion at all. Unless the message wasn't personal. Unless the silence was intentional. Because powerful people don't react. They signal. And if that moment was a signal, it wasn't meant for Meghan. It was meant for the room that hears something most people never stop to think about. Hollywood doesn't collapse when a celebrity loses favor. But it does shift when power redraws its boundaries. And Dana Walden has redrawn them before. Quietly. Strategically. Without ever appearing in the headlines. For example, when other executives were scrambling to chase streaming trends, Dana didn't panic. She repositioned. She didn't abandon network television overnight. She evolved it. She bridged it. She kept one foot in the old system while building influence in the new one. That's why she survived the industry shift. Everyone else chose a side. Dana chose both. And that's what separates power from ambition. Ambition reacts. Power anticipates. So when someone approaches a figure like that in a public moment, hoping for validation, alignment, or even just a shared frame, it's not a casual request. It's a strategic move. And strategic moves only work when the other party agrees to play. Dana didn't play, which means something much bigger than a photo didn't happen that night. An alignment didn't happen. And that's what the industry paid attention to. Let's zoom out for a moment. Most celebrities operate on visibility. The more they're seen, the more they matter. Executives like Dana operate on the opposite principle. the less they need to be seen, the more powerful they become. Think about how rare that is. A person whose influence increases, even when they're not in the public eye. That's not fame. That's infrastructure. So when someone outside that infrastructure tries to enter through optics instead of access, the system reacts. Not out of ego, out of preservation. Because power is not shared casually. Not at that level. Not on that night. Here's where the emotional weight of this story really sits. To the average viewer, it may seem like just a missed photo. To the industry, it signaled separation. Not conflict. Not hostility. Just a lack of connection. And in Hollywood, lack of connection is deadlier than bad press. Bad press fades. Isolation doesn't. Once a figure loses proximity to power, the narrative becomes harder to control. Not because the media turns against them, but because the industry stops participating. And when the industry stops participating, no amount of publicity can fix it. That's why this moment spiraled. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was definitive. People didn't walk away whispering, "Did you see what happened?" They walked away asking, "What does this mean?" And those questions are the beginning of every downfall story in this town. Not scandal, interpretation. But let's clear something up. Dana Walden is not known for humiliation. She doesn't embarrass people. She doesn't deliver public messages. She doesn't create scenes. Her influence is subtle. So if the alleged response that circulated after the event was true, or even partially true, it wouldn't have been emotional. It would have been decisive. A boundary, not a blow-up. And that's exactly why it shocked people. Because if someone who avoids confrontation appears to deliver one, the assumption isn't that they lost control. The assumption is that they meant it. Which brings us to the most unsettling possibility. Maybe this wasn't spontaneous at all. Maybe the distance had already been decided long before the red carpet. And the moment wasn't the beginning. It was the confirmation. So now we're left with the question nobody wants to ask directly. Why would someone as powerful and composed as Dana allegedly choose not to engage? Not privately. Not politely. Not even for optics? There are only a few possibilities. 1. It was strictly professional. A clean boundary. A neutral no. 2. It was symbolic. A silent signal to the room. 3. It was the result of a decision made long before the event. A decision the public never saw. And if the third possibility is true, then the real story didn't happen on the carpet. It happened years earlier. Which means we're not dealing with a sudden rejection. We're dealing with a culmination. A moment that didn't break anything, but exposed what was already broken. And that brings us to the only logical next question. What happened before this night? That made the silence so meaningful. Because if Dana Walden rarely closes doors, and almost never does so publicly, then this wasn't random. It was connected to something older, something unspoken, something the industry already knew. Which means the red carpet wasn't the beginning of this story. It was the moment the story could no longer be hidden. And what comes next forces us to go backwards. To the warning signs no one paid attention to. The quiet distancing. The subtle shifts. The opportunities that never materialized. Because the truth is, this wasn't the first no. It was just the first one the world noticed. And the next chapter reveals exactly why that matters. Before the world fixates on the red carpet moment, there's something vital to understand. Hollywood is a history of quiet decisions, whispered reputations, and unseen alignments. It's not just about who shows up. It's about who's allowed to show up. And perhaps more importantly, who isn't. Most observers assume Meghan's struggles, if you can call them that, began on the carpet that night. But the truth is far more complex. It's a history that stretches back years, hidden in the subtle shifts of influence, the quiet recalibrations that most people never notice until the impact is unavoidable. Think about it this way. Hollywood doesn't operate on drama alone. It operates on memory. Not collective memory of audiences, but internal memory. The kind stored by executives, producers, agents, and the people who greenlight the projects that shape an industry. One misstep in a private room, one perceived misalignment, one subtle misreading of a network's priorities, it doesn't disappear. It accumulates. And for someone attempting to re-enter the inner circles of power, that accumulation can be fatal long before the first camera flash. Let's rewind to an earlier period, Meghan's initial Hollywood appearances post-royal life. Some insiders recall events that seemed minor on the surface. Attending an industry gala without prior alignment. approaching influential figures casually instead of through formal channels, expressing ambition publicly before securing private endorsements. To the public, these moments looked harmless, perhaps even charming. To the people controlling access, a warning. Because in Hollywood, ambition without preparation is not admired. It's noted, and notes eventually turn into patterns. Here's a fact most people overlook. Being invited to an event doesn't guarantee influence. Presence is a privilege, not proof. You can attend parties, walk carpets, and smile for photographers, but none of that translates into power. Power comes from trust, from respect, from years of being quietly decisive in an industry that rewards control over visibility. Dana Walden embodies this. Her decisions are rarely public, but they are always consequential. So when Meghan tried to navigate this space, she was swimming in currents that had been shaping for decades, currents most people never even notice. And she was entering a zone where one misread current could end any chance of influence. It wasn't personal, at least not initially. Hollywood rarely acts out of personal animosity. It acts out of risk management. Every executive, every producer, every studio head makes mental calculations about who can be trusted to deliver, who aligns with their vision, and who might upset delicate balances. And when someone has a global profile but no internal alliances, that person becomes unpredictable, not inherently negative, just unknown. And unknown equals risk. Risk in Hollywood isn't handled with dramatic confrontations. It's handled quietly, strategically, and often invisibly. Let's be clear. This isn't speculation. Insiders have repeatedly described slow closures as the industry's invisible tool. You're not officially shut out. You're not publicly criticized. You're simply deprioritized. Requests for access take longer to answer. Meetings that once happened are delayed indefinitely. Opportunities shift toward people who are considered reliable. This isn't gossip. It's structural, and it builds over years. So by the time Meghan arrived at the 2025 International Emmy Awards, she wasn't walking into a neutral environment. She was stepping into a history she didn't fully control. Every look, every pause, every slight absence of acknowledgement wasn't just a random occurrence. It was the accumulation of years of quiet decisions. And while the public might interpret the red carpet moment as a simple rejection, industry insiders saw something much bigger: the signal of long-term prioritization, the confirmation of previously invisible boundaries, the quiet, unmistakable message that access was not guaranteed. Here's another layer most people miss: the emotional psychology of repeated subtle exclusion. It's different from a public scandal. It's different from overt criticism. It's quieter, more insidious, more lasting. When you experience repeated, low-level rebuffs, it shapes behavior. You start second-guessing your approach. You reconsider alliances. You anticipate failure before it even happens. And by the time Meghan reached Dana Walden's line of sight, that pattern had already begun to influence her. Not visibly, not dramatically, but internally. Which is why the red carpet moment wasn't just an interaction. It was the emotional culmination of unseen history. Let's ask the audience something directly. Have you ever tried to regain a position in a space where your past mistakes or perceived misalignments follow you, even if no one ever says a word? That pressure isn't visible to outsiders. It's subtle, psychological, devastating in ways that headlines can't capture. And when that history meets the present, it creates collisions that feel sudden, even though they've been building for years. And yet, there's one more factor that complicates everything: timing. Hollywood moves in cycles. Influence is seasonal. Alignments can shift overnight based on a single announcement, a single acquisition, a single award. By 2025, Dana Walden had not just survived the industry's upheavals. She had cemented her influence in a way that made her decisions unassailable. A momentary interaction with her was never just a photo. It was a potential gatekeeper's judgment on a career's trajectory, which explains why the red carpet collision felt seismic, even if the cameras didn't capture it. Because some collisions aren't visible, they're structural. And this one was about to reverberate beyond the carpet, beyond the whispers, and straight into the heart of Hollywood's hidden power dynamics. But here's the kicker: Hollywood rarely tells its own history out loud. Everyone talks about premieres, awards, scandals, but very few people talk about the invisible structures that actually run the show. The alliances, the quiet approvals, the subtle exclusions. They are the lifeblood of the industry. And those invisible currents had been shaping Meghan's opportunities for years, whether she realized it or not. There were events she wasn't invited to, meetings that were scheduled but quietly canceled, projects she might have been considered for but quietly redirected to other talent. None of it was dramatic. None of it required confrontation. Yet the pattern was unmistakable. And when someone like Dana Walden is involved, patterns matter more than moments. Because Dana doesn't make mistakes with perception. She doesn't miscalculate optics. And she rarely reverses decisions made in private. So, the significance of the 2025 International Emmy Awards was not simply that Meghan tried for a photo. It was that the room had already been conditioned to expect a certain outcome, and the outcome aligned perfectly with years of subtle messaging. Let's pause and consider the psychology at play. Imagine trying to reclaim relevance in a system where your past actions, missteps, misalignments, or even mere absence have quietly accumulated against you. You know the public may still adore you. You know your name still generates headlines. But the industry? It remembers differently. It notices the small, quiet things. Who returned your call? Who smiled genuinely at your pitch? Who allowed you access? And who didn't? By the time Meghan approached Dana Walden, she was navigating a maze built of years of silent signals. And as the photographer's flashes continued, she was performing on a stage where she could control nothing but her expression. The rest? Already decided. This is where people outside the industry often misunderstand what happened. They think power is about fame. They think influence is about being liked. They think a royal title, a Netflix deal, and global visibility guarantees inclusion. It doesn't. Not in Hollywood. Influence is permission. And permission is earned, maintained, and monitored constantly by people like Dana Walden. Which brings us back to the red carpet moment. The silence. The absence of acknowledgement. The denial of proximity. It wasn't a rejection in the traditional sense. It was confirmation. Confirmation that Meghan's past misalignments, perceived or real, had consequences that even global attention couldn't override. And the room felt it immediately. Now, let's ask the critical question. How do you navigate a world where one person can quietly determine your trajectory, and where the history you carry into the room is more influential than the person standing beside you? That's exactly what Meghan faced that night. Every step she took, every smile she offered, every small adjustment to posture or angle was influenced by decades of invisible Hollywood rules she couldn't see and couldn't ignore. The weight of invisible history is subtle, but crushing. And the reason the 2025 International Emmy Awards became unforgettable isn't because of confrontation. It's because the collision between history and present was undeniable. Dana Walden's presence didn't just honor her. It reminded the industry, and anyone hoping for inclusion, of the rules that govern access. And by walking the carpet with calm, deliberate precision, she was signaling something everyone in attendance understood, even if they couldn't put it into words. So here's the cliffhanger for this chapter. The red carpet wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the moment where history met the present, and where the consequences of the past became unavoidable. And what happened next, the moment that actually set the narrative ablaze, wasn't a misstep. It was a revelation. A revelation that would change the perception of Meghan Markle and Hollywood forever. It was supposed to be simple. A single photo. One shared frame. A fleeting visual confirmation that everything was fine. That doors hadn't closed. That access was still possible. In Hollywood, a photo is never just a photo. It's a statement, a headline, a signal, a validation. And for someone in Meghan's position, it could have meant the difference between being included in the next wave of opportunities or being quietly sidelined. The 2025 International Emmy Awards had been meticulously planned. Every step of the carpet was coordinated. Every camera angle mapped. Every honoree given a carefully timed moment to shine. Dana Walden's arrival was the centerpiece. Her presence commanded attention naturally, no dramatics required. She didn't need to pose for the cameras. She was the story. Meghan, by contrast, was attempting to create a moment, to insert herself into a narrative that had already been written without her. And this was where the collision became inevitable. Let's visualize the scene. Photographers crouched, lenses aimed. Publicists hovered, silently guiding clients to their designated positions. Executives lingered in the background, scanning the arrivals, mentally noting who was present and who was absent. Meghan's team saw their window. They adjusted positions. Smiles rehearsed, posture calibrated, timing calculated to the millisecond. And then she moved. Step forward. A brief approach toward Dana. A chance to claim one frame. One acknowledgement. It sounds harmless. Innocuous, even. But in Hollywood, there's nothing innocuous about proximity to power. Here's the first critical fact about the moment. Dana Walden did not stop. She didn't glance. She didn't lean in. She didn't acknowledge the approach. To the casual observer, it might have seemed like nothing. But to anyone who understands the subtle mechanics of influence, it was seismic. A single movement, or lack thereof, can signal approval, neutrality, or denial. And in this case, the absence of acknowledgement carried weight far beyond the visible. It was a quiet but unmistakable boundary. Let's pause and consider the psychology behind this. Imagine anticipating validation, planning a move, preparing a micro-performance that could shift public perception. And then, nothing. No recognition. No gesture. No cue that the moment is yours. Just silence. Not hostility. Not rejection in the traditional sense. Just absence. And absence, in Hollywood, often speaks louder than words. Because power isn't demonstrated through words. It's demonstrated through control, through selective engagement, through the quiet signals that only insiders can interpret. And Dana Walden is a master of this language. Meghan's intended photo op was more than a snapshot. It was a strategic statement, a signal to Hollywood, to studios, to media outlets, and to anyone assessing influence. I am still relevant. I still belong. I still have access. But the response, or non-response, was the exact opposite. It wasn't dramatic. There was no verbal confrontation. No one yelled. No one gestured. Just deliberate, controlled indifference. And that control amplified the message exponentially. Because in a room full of people trained to read signals, the absence of acknowledgement is never overlooked. Now, consider the stakes. A shared photo with Dana could have reopened doors that had quietly closed over years. It could have signaled alignment. It could have suggested inclusion. Instead, the lack of engagement sent the opposite signal. Doors were closed. Inclusion was not granted. And the industry noticed immediately. Whispers began, not about what was said, but about what was missing, about what could have been, about why the interaction failed before it even began. And whispers in Hollywood aren't idle chatter. They're precursors, indicators of perception shifts that affect decisions, opportunities, and career trajectories. Here's the paradox. The photo op was supposed to be the easiest part, the moment designed to be simple. Yet simplicity often exposes vulnerability. Because if someone depends on validation from a figure of power, the act of requesting it is inherently risky. If granted, it confirms relevance. If denied or ignored, it exposes fragility. And Meghan was navigating a high-risk moment in a highly visible arena. The anticipation in the room is critical to understand. Cameras poised, publicists tense, observers watching subtle shifts. Every micro-expression recorded mentally by industry insiders. Every movement weighed for significance. One misread. One gesture interpreted incorrectly. One pause too long. It's the kind of environment that makes a simple photo request feel like a life-or-death gamble for perception. And in that environment, Dana Walden's non-engagement wasn't neutral. It was definitive. The room noticed. The cameras noticed. The whispers started. And that's when the moment began to ripple beyond the carpet itself. Here's a question for the audience. Have you ever tried to create an opportunity with someone in power, only to realize that the window had already closed? The frustration, the tension, the recalculation, it's subtle but intense. And for Meghan, that subtlety became the defining feature of the night. Because it wasn't just a missed photo. It was a reflection of the current reality. Influence, alignment, and access had already shifted. And what came next, the part that turned a missed photo into the story of the night, was about to unfold in a way no one could have predicted. The atmosphere was electric, but not in the way most people think of red carpet energy. This wasn't about glamour or excitement. This was about tension, anticipation, and silent judgment. As Meghan moved closer, Those in the room couldn't help but notice the unspoken dynamics at play. It was like watching two forces approach each other, one representing history, power, and structure, the other, visibility, ambition, and hope. And while the public often interprets red carpet moments as spontaneous, they are rarely random. Every movement is calculated. Every approach is a strategy. Every glance can signify alignment or rejection. Meghan's team had likely rehearsed this micro-performance countless times. They would have timed her steps, adjusted her posture, checked the angles, smiled at precisely the right moment. But no rehearsal can account for the deliberate control of someone like Dana Walden. Because Dana doesn't react, she signals. And when she signals by not reacting, it sends a louder message than words ever could. The moment Meghan attempted to secure the photo op, she reached the threshold of Dana's presence. A few feet, just enough to bridge the gap. And yet, Dana's attention remained elsewhere. The cameras followed her trajectory, not Meghan's. She continued toward the press zone with deliberate grace, not ignoring her entirely, but making clear the interaction would not occur on her terms. To the untrained eye, it may have seemed insignificant. But in an environment where every micro-movement carries meaning, it was monumental. Executives, publicists, and photographers, all trained to read such signals, recognized the weight immediately. The red carpet had become a silent arena of influence, and Meghan, for the first time in years, was not the focus. The implications went beyond optics. Hollywood operates on proximity, access, inclusion. A photograph is never just a photograph. It's a tacit endorsement, a validation that someone belongs in the room of power. By withholding that validation, Dana essentially shifted the narrative. Meghan's attempt at alignment didn't fail because she misstepped. It failed because the system had already made a decision for her, and the industry noticed. Let's pause here and reflect. If you were in Meghan's position, standing in the middle of the carpet, realizing that your intended moment of validation would not materialize, what would you feel? Frustration? Disbelief? Anxiety? All of it, probably. And perhaps most importantly, the realization that influence is not a matter of fame, but of networks, trust, and subtle historical patterns. Dana's silent response didn't just deny a photo. It confirmed a long-standing pattern. It communicated a truth that the public doesn't often see. Power is quiet. Influence is deliberate. And access is conditional. This is where the tension intensified. Observers, insiders, and the press, whether consciously or not, began speculating. Why didn't Dana stop? Why didn't she acknowledge the approach? Was it deliberate, a misreading, or a premeditated decision? And those speculations fueled the next